Yes, yes, yes. Good afternoon, or good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Before we can start the show, we got 137 concurrent viewers. Let me get at least 70 likes. Let me get 70 likes, then I'll start the show. I want to get at least 50% of the concurrent viewers liking the video. That's not unreasonable to ask. Shout out to everybody in the chat. We will get to the conversation. We got a lot to talk about. Let me just get 70 likes in the chat. Make it 75. There's nearly 140 concurrent viewers. Give me 100. Give me 75 likes. And we'll start the show. Let's get this stream seen. Big up everybody in the chat. Here we go, 55. We're nearly at 75. There you go, Joker. You got the right idea. Let's make it 80. Now, we'll do 75. 10 more, we'll do 75. We're nearly there. We're on 65. We get to 75 peeps. Why not 100? I mean, people keep pushing it up. Why not? Okay. 158. We're 158 concurrent viewers. So, need to get at least half of that. I like this game. Everyone keeps pushing it up. It's like an auction. It's like an auction. Make it 316 like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yeah. Shout out to Chili Beef in the chat. 420. Yeah, we'll keep pushing it up throughout the course. Anyway, let's start. Big up everybody. Big up Ocean Blue, G-Man, Peter, Andre Rodriguez, Jerry, Sean Baker, JJ, everybody I can see in the chat here. Boxing fan. Who else we got in here? Philip Answer, big up. Callum, Prav, 7 Reload, Rainman, Tawheed Ali, 24, big up. Is it Gizo? Shout out to him. Big up Devin every time. Iron Fist. Peter, I think I mentioned him. S1, 1000 TJ. Big up. And he's right away asking me the question, Hatman, have you heard of the Australian guy, Isaac Cox, that Bricktop is apparently connected to? I haven't. Shout out to Andre in the chat. Chrissy P. Yes, yes. Okay, let's get straight into the agenda here. Let's get some images on screen for you guys. Let's get straight into the agenda. So, Trading Places. How many of you have seen this classic film starring Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd? Who's that female in it? I forget her name. What's the female in Trading Places? Something Curtis. Jamie Lee Curtis, thank you. Yes. Jamie Lee Curtis. That is literally what has happened with Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren. They've traded places. Just a few years ago, Eddie Hearn was flying high, acting all cocksure and arrogant, thought he was invincible. He was parring Frank Warren off like he weren't even competition. You guys remember that? He used to say regularly in interviews that Frank Warren's not competition. Don't call Queensbury my competition. There's nobody on my level. And now look at it. What a day when the tables are turned. What a day when the tables are turned. Oh my gosh. Every dog has its day. Every dog has its day. You know, the thing is, whenever I have pointed this out, that Matchroom are kind of on the decline, and they have been for the past 18 months or so. People think that I'm some type of Frank Warren fanboy. Hell no. I would rather Eddie Hearn be on top than Frank Warren, but I'm just calling it like I see it. And to me, it seemed obvious that Eddie Hearn was on the decline. And here we are. Frank Warren, as somebody said earlier on in the chat, has sent Eddie Hearn back to the Stone Age in terms of his success against Frank Warren fighters, at least. And look how many, it's just a small hall promoter. That's exactly what he used to say in M1 Life. Just a small hall promoter. And it weren't even long ago that he was saying that. Look how things have changed. Crazy. So, yeah, trading places. Eddie Hearn got too big for his britches. Started thinking that he was King Midas and everything that he touched would turn to gold. And the moment I knew Eddie Hearn had lost it was when he did that DAZN deal, the UK DAZN deal, because he was already working with DAZN in the States. But when he did the the UK DAZN deal, and he came up with that commentary team, and he started talking about game changed, I'm thinking, okay, Eddie Hearn has completely lost the plot at this point. Which part of Maya Jama, Chris Lloyd, Darren Barker supposed to be the comic relief? Chris Lloyd and Darren Barker, how can I put it politely? They're about as funny as cancer. That's how funny that duo was. Huh? And that was supposed to be the comic relief? Good God almighty. Maya Jama, you're getting a social media / television presenter who doesn't know anything about boxing, and you think that she's going to stick around week in, week out, doing these boxing shows? I mean, come on. Stevie Wonder could have seen that that wasn't a good appointment, that she would have so many different distractions and what have you. Somebody that not even into boxing like that. Come on. I mean, I heard rumors about what DAZN were paying her per show. I don't know whether they're true. They're just rumors. But it was crazy figures. The rumors flying around, what they were paying her per show. And I'm like, what on earth is Eddie Hearn doing? Paying this girl who don't know nothing about boxing an insane amount of money per show. Like something like 100 grand or close to. Again, I don't know if that's true, but those are the figures flying around. I'm thinking, what? Talk about spunking money up the wall. Good God. Unbelievable. But that was a measure of how gone Eddie Hearn was, how lost he was in his ego and in his success doing stuff like that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You know what I mean? You can't blame Maya Jama, right? If you're being offered silly money by some boxing promoter whose head is in the clouds, you're going to take it. But from Eddie Hearn perspective, foolishness. Straight foolishness. Afro Soul says, not Hatman pocket watching. Hey, I'm not a hater. I don't hate on the next person money. If they get it without, stepping on people, good for them. Good for them. But it's just the fact that Eddie Hearn was talking about game changed and this is the greatest commentary team in the history of boxing. What on earth was this guy talking about? That's what I knew. He'd lost the plot at that stage. He'd lost the plot. Ayed says, was Maya Jama even that bad? It wasn't that she was necessarily that bad. It's just that it's obvious she was never going to... It's just that Eddie Hearn was paying too much money for somebody who obviously wasn't going to commit. You know? She had a whole career outside of boxing where she's like this massive influencer and celebrity and all that kind of thing. It don't make no sense bringing someone like that in to be your main lead presenter. Obviously, they're going to be more distracted They're going to have other things going on. They're not going to care about boxing like that. You know? But Eddie Hearn, yeah, he was trying to bring the simps in by putting Maya Jama there. You know, simps are easily impressed. So, yeah, Eddie Hearn, back to the Stone Age for him. AJ's been taken down. Canelo's gone. I mean, Carl Froch retired long time. His heavyweight stable went from about 15 down to what? 1? Who's he got now? Johnny Fisher? I mean, AJ's finished. Hrgovic, that might be a lifeline for him if he can re-sign him. Because last I checked, Hrgovic was out of contract. Then he fought for Matchroom on the 5v5. I don't know whether he signed a long-term contract for that or if it was a one-off deal like Deontay Wilder did. But if Eddie Hearn was smart, he would go sign Filip Hrgovic right now. Because Hrgovic's performance against Dubois don't look so bad now, does it? It don't look so bad now after what Dubois did to Anthony Joshua. Yeah, Hrgovic got that chin. He can take a shot. He can stand right there and trade with Dubois. And he's not worried about getting hit on the chin and doing the stanky leg. He just needs to pace himself better. Devin says, re-sign Lawrence Okolie. Please no. Now, shout out to Lawrence Okolie, man. I'm just playing. Okolie looked good against Ryzansky. You know, dealt with him properly under Joe Gallagher. And now he's kind of scratching around looking for his next fight. He burned the bridge there with Eddie Hearn. I'm not saying he was wrong to, but he burned the bridge with Eddie Hearn. He was working with, Ben Shalom. Not sure what's going on there. If he can revive that relationship, maybe do more fights with Ben Shalom. I don't know about Frank Warren. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, let's move on to some more stuff here. So, I touched on this. In fact, no. But before we do that, let's get silly for 1 second, right? We took a trip down memory lane, and we tend to do that on most of these live streams now. Take a trip down memory lane. Maybe we'll do that in this one as well a little bit later on. But there was a couple of television shows, sitcoms, that I mentioned in one of my previous streams, the last one or the one before. You can see them here. Well, one of them I mentioned, the other one I didn't. I mentioned this one, Game On. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Game On, it's right there on YouTube. You can watch Series 1. Forget about Series 2 and 3. Series 2 and 3 are rubbish because they change the main actor. You see the guy here with the dark hair on screen? Yeah? He was replaced for Season 2 and 3 by an actor that couldn't hold his jockstrap, basically. Rubbish. So forget about Seasons 2 and 3 or Series 2 and 3, however they worded it. Just watch Series 1. Hilarious. Yeah? Now, some of the humor, and I lived through the 90s, I remember it well, is some of the humor wouldn't get past the censors today. That's in this sitcom, okay? And some of it is pretty damn dodgy even to me, right? Some very dodgy jokes in there that raised an eyebrow with me, but that kind of thing was so common in the 90s that we didn't think anything of it at the time, right? I was a teenager. In fact, no. Was I a teenager? I might have been 20. This came out, I think, 98, 97, 98, late 90s. Game On came out, I think. So I might have been in my late teens, early 20s. So anyway, Game On. Watch it on YouTube. Hilarious. Series 1. It's got a playlist right there. Definitely check that out. And also, another classic from the 90s. How could you guys not know about this? Married with Children. Absolute classic. Al Bundy, Peg, the wife. Amazing show. Can't get enough of it. Hilarious. They don't make shows like this anymore. Cannot recommend Married with Children highly enough. Yeah. So make sure you check out Married with Children. Anyway, back to the boxing. So we got on the agenda here. Now, in one of my recent live streams, I was responding to people who are blaming Ben Davison. I even saw True Geordie did a video basically blasting Ben Davison for AJ's defeat to Daniel Dubois. They're saying that Davison gave AJ bad advice, told him to roll the dice. You know, they're saying he shouldn't have done that. Also told AJ to throw the uppercut, and Shane McGuigan was commentating at the time apparently and said that that's bad advice. You know, don't throw the uppercut because Dubois is going to counter him with a right hand if he throws the uppercut. And also, AJ kept getting caught with his hands down. And they say that Ben Davison didn't remind him enough to keep his hands up. But here's the thing. Ben Davison, to be fair, has been very magnanimous. He said that since he got so much credit for AJ's performances against Wallen and Ngannou, then he's willing to accept blame for AJ's defeat to Daniel Dubois. So very magnanimous of Ben Davison. However, I actually don't blame him for AJ's defeat. And I'll explain why in a second. First of all, shout out to Simon Brandy for the super chat. He says, what do you make of Haney suing Garcia? The same guy who said he'd kill Garcia, Naz, Frutch, Hay, should be part of any commentary team. All right, I'll come on to your super chat in a second. I'm just going to finish my thought on Ben Davison, but shout out to Simon Brandy for the super chat. So, can I pin this? Let me try to pin this. I don't forget about it. All right, there's no way to pin it. That's annoying. All right, so here's why I don't blame Ben Davison. Trainers are never going to be able to prepare you for every single scenario in a boxing ring. There are too many variables. So if you're going to be a great fighter, you have to have a certain level of intuition in the ring, a certain level of discernment, ring IQ, where when the trainer hasn't warned you about certain traps that your opponent is setting, you should be able to figure out what he's doing and take the appropriate action. Also, if you're a great fighter, you should be able to interpret your trainer's instructions appropriately. If he says throw the uppercut, you're not supposed to be throwing it from too far out. You're not supposed to be throwing it at inopportune moments. You're not supposed to be throwing it with your chin in the air. Your trainer shouldn't need to tell you, oh yeah, throw the uppercut, but wait until this happens and make sure your chin is down and do. When you are an experienced fighter, two-time world champion, you've already worked with a whole heap of trainers in the past, Robert Garcia, Rob McCracken, Tony Sims, you did a bit with Virgil Hunter, obviously Derek James, Angel Fernandez, so many trainers. At this stage of the game, nearly 35 years of age, Ben Davison shouldn't have to tell him, oh yeah, when you throw the uppercut, keep your chin down, don't throw it in this scenario, don't throw it in that scenario, but throw it in this particular scenario where it's safe. So I don't really see it as a failing of Ben Davison, what happened. I just see it as a failing of Anthony Joshua. He doesn't have the ring IQ that is required to be a great fighter. AJ's a good fighter, but he's not a great fighter. And that's the difference. He doesn't have that intuitive ability that great fighters have. Yeah? This is why I don't blame Davison. If AJ was a novice, then you'd need a trainer to maybe explain a little bit more to him, because you wouldn't expect him to know a certain amount by this stage of his career, by early on in his career. Let's say he was a 23-year-old novice. You wouldn't expect him to know a particular amount. But when you're nearly 35 and you're as experienced as Anthony Joshua, the mistakes he made there in the ring, I don't blame Ben Davison for that at this stage. I blame AJ for that. Not having the nous, not having the savvy. Yeah, not knowing that you shouldn't back up out of the pocket with your chin in the air. I mean, come on. especially when your back's towards the ropes. Nah, that's a failing on AJ's part. You could get the greatest trainer in the world and give him Anthony Joshua. AJ's still going to make mistakes, particularly against a guy like Dubois who rushes him like that. It was an open question how AJ would cope with an aggressive opponent with quick feet like Dubois. He's never fought anyone like that before. He's fought aggressive guys, but not with that kind of foot speed and jab. And I thought AJ would be able to time Dubois coming in. Evidently, he couldn't. Dubois' feet were too quick, and he was able to rush past AJ's attempts to line him up with a right hand and go to town on him. And because AJ didn't want to exchange on the inside, every time Dubois got close, AJ just grabbed. What does that tell Dubois? That tells Dubois that there's nothing coming back when I open up. That means it's safe to open up. That means anytime I get within punching range on this guy, I don't need to fear anything. He's not going to punch. He's not going to try to punch with me. He's only going to grab. You see it? And AJ's moving around with a scared look on his face. And Dubois, it's like a red rag to a bull. So I don't blame Ben Davison for that. I blame Anthony Joshua for that. Real talk. I blame AJ for it. AJ should have better interpreted Ben Davison's instructions. I mean, you know, telling the guy to roll the dice, people are saying it's a terrible thing for him to tell AJ. I disagree. AJ was basically, you know, a punch or two away, as we saw, from getting knocked out. Ben Davison knew that. He knew it was only a matter of time before AJ got chinned. And he was a mile behind on points. AJ doesn't have great stamina. So if it's a matter of who lands the next big punch is going to win the fight, of course, Ben Davison's going to tell him, roll the dice. I'd rather you get knocked out trying to knock him out than continue running around scared. And at the start of the fifth round, what did AJ do? He came out with a little bit of a swagger, sticking his tongue out and, you know, gesturing to the crowd. So that little pep talk worked. And then he went and landed a big right hand. So I think that Davison's advice up to that point worked. It's just that when AJ threw the uppercut, chin was in the air. He'd already got caught with a counter right hand a few moments earlier. That should have been the signal to him. Okay, I'm on the wrong side here. I need to move to my right. And I need to get my left hand up because he's already just caught me with a counter right hand there. He didn't do it. So, and incidentally, Eddie Hearn's also backing Ben Davison. He says it wasn't Ben Davison's fault that Anthony Joshua didn't follow instructions. I'm not sure whether he didn't follow instructions. Maybe there was instructions in the gym, which AJ didn't follow in the fight. But he didn't interpret the instructions the way you would expect a fighter of his level of experience. Yeah? We've been through, I mean, AJ's had so many trainers in the past that he should have learned things from. A truly great fighter takes things from every trainer and incorporates it. Understands how to, you know, incorporate what he learned from one trainer and the other trainer and make it work for him. So, yeah, for me, it's just down to AJ's lack of innate ring intelligence. That's ultimately what it is. Anyway, moving on from Ben Davison. In fact, no, before we move on, let's get to the super chat. So Simon Brandy super chat. What do you make of Haney suing Garcia? Yeah, we did talk about it yesterday in the super chat, in case you missed it. But yeah, Haney suing Garcia. He seems traumatized. He can't get over what happened to him. You know, I think, again, I mentioned in a previous live stream that I reckon Haney was watching AJ because he was at the fight. And he might have been having flashbacks to the night that he got knocked all over the ring by Ryan Garcia. He knows what it's like to be in that position. The crowd's there. You know, you're swimming on the canvas doing front crawl because you're so out of it. Devin Haney's been there. So him suing Ryan Garcia, it's a sign of how traumatized he is. But at the same time, I saw Dwyer talking about it. And he is obviously a lawyer. And he doesn't think that Devin Haney's got much of a case. But I'm not so sure about that. It depends on whether Ryan Garcia admitted guilt to the New York State Athletic Commission. Because Eddie Hearn in the past has implied that Ryan Garcia cut a deal with the New York State Athletic Commission whereby he would admit guilt in exchange for a reduced ban. He got like 12 months, right? If that's the case, I don't know whether it is, but if that's the case, I'm no lawyer here, people, but if that's the case, then surely that means that Devin Haney does have a chance of winning his lawsuit. If they can get into that conversation that was had or that deal that was cut between the New York State Athletic Commission and Ryan Garcia, that he admitted guilt. If they can release that in court, then maybe Devin Haney can say, look, he admitted guilt, therefore that shows he took it deliberately, therefore I want compensation for whatever it is, fraud and a bunch of other stuff that he's suing him for. So I know Devin Haney comes across as kind of desperate and behaving like a Karen and all that, but I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that he's not the guy that failed the PED test. Let's not lose sight of that fact. Let's not allow Ryan Garcia off the hook here. He's the guy that failed the test, and we should be giving him plenty of smoke as well. In fact, we should be giving him more smoke than we're giving Devin Haney. The guy failed the test. He's serving a ban. It is what it is. But shout out for the super chat. Drew Chambers says, if your hands are down all fight and your chin in the air all fight, your trainer says nothing. He trained you to do that and didn't see the massive problem. But again, a fighter of AJ's experience should know when you need to get your hands up. Should the trainer really have to tell a guy that experienced, who's already been dropped at the end of the first round, get your hands up when the guy has got you close to the ropes? That should be second nature at that stage of your career. AJ made that same mistake that he made in the first round. He made it twice in the third round. The exact same mistake he made at the end of the first round, he made it twice in the third round. He backed up to the ropes with his chin in the air, and Dubois brushed him with a left hook in the middle of the third round. Nearly could have had him again there, and then he did get him at the end of the third. How is AJ not, making mental notes of when he's being caught by these shots? I mean, it's incredible. Now, a fighter with that level of experience can't figure it out. Does he need to be told everything? Maybe Ben Davison did. I'd have to go and listen to everything Ben Davison said in the corner, because at certain points, maybe he did tell him to keep his hands up in certain situations. But for me, it's just the buck stopping with AJ. He's had the benefit of the doubt so many times in his career. Is he still going to get it now? Shouldn't he know better at this stage to be making these fundamental errors? Yeah, Armand says, is this the only case that is not the trainer's fault? Of course it's not the only case that is not the trainer's fault. There's loads of cases where it's not the trainer's fault. But, like I say, this guy, Anthony Joshua, has had so many trainers, great trainers. People like Derek James, people like Robert Garcia. Rob McCracken has done his thing with Carl Frott. He's had so many trainers. This is the point I'm making. How is it that a guy this experienced, who's worked with so many good coaches, is still making such fundamental errors? Like, come on. You're supposed to know these things at this stage of your career. You shouldn't have to be reminded every round. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, so moving on from Ben Davison. Now I'm going to attack a trainer here. I've been defending one. I'm about to attack one. Watch this. Don Charles. Now, some of you are going to think I've got it in for Don Charles. Well, Don Charles thinks that Gareth A. Davis has got it in for him. So, I'm not sure if you guys saw this on TalkSport. Don Charles kind of lured Gareth A. Davis in, gave him a bunch of respect, and told him that Gareth A. Davis was the first journalist to acknowledge him as a trainer. As a trainer. Give him his flowers. And after sweeting Gareth A. Davis up, he then turned on him and said, but lately, Gareth, you've been having a go at me, and it's like you got a vendetta. I'm paraphrasing here. It's like you got a vendetta against me. It's personal, Gareth. You keep on picking against Daniel Dubois, and it's like a personal thing against me. I've been saying for the longest time, for my money, Don Charles is a donut. The man's a donut, and this is why. So somehow, he's only been working with Daniel Dubois for what, 4 fights? Since Usyk, right? 4 fights. Gareth A. Davis has been talking about Daniel Dubois long before he hooked up with Don Charles. When he quit against Joe Joyce, Gareth A. Davis spoke about that. Going into the Usyk fight, why on earth would Gareth A. Davis be picking Daniel Dubois to win? On what basis? You know, how would Don Charles take that personally if he's a reasonable man? But somehow, Don Charles, who is an overly emotional character, this is what kind of irks me about him. He's overly emotional, and because he's overly emotional, he's liable to say silly things. I'm not saying Don Charles knows nothing about training fighters, okay? But again, he's got this overly emotional component to him that compromises his intellect, whatever intellect he actually has. Yeah? His emotion supersedes his intellect at times, makes him say silly things. And this is an example of it. And I'm no big Gareth A. Davis defender. I think Gareth A. Davis is a joker. But what Don Charles did on this show, I mean, it was cringe. As you guys see it, Don Charles, after Daniel, and by the way, here's one thing I want to point out to you guys. Did you look at Daniel Dubois' corner during the AJ fight? He was still listening to his dad. Did you guys catch that? He was... Bro, he was still listening to his dad. So Don Charles needs to have that conversation again. But, you know, he's getting the bag with Daniel Dubois. He always wanted a heavyweight champion. And now he wants to take all the credit, so on and so forth. That's okay. But I think he's gone megalomaniac now. Don Charles is like Muhammad Ali. You know, after the Rumble in the Jungle, when they did that interview with Ali, and he was screaming at all the journalists, saying, I'm the real champion, never doubt me. You know, the famous interview of Ali? That's how Don Charles was on TalkSport, talking to Gareth A. Davis. It was ridiculous. It was so ridiculous. That's my opinion. Man's a donut. He's a donut. Overly emotional. Starts talking rubbish. I think they need to keep him away from the camera. just do the training in the gym with your fighter. But as soon as this guy starts talking, it's like, oh no. Oh no. Man thinks that, you know, we've all got a personal vendetta against him because we picked against Daniel Dubois. Daniel Dubois quit in 2 fights. Of course, people are going to be picking against him. How does that mean we've got a vendetta against Don Charles, or Gareth A. Davies has a vendetta against Don Charles? It's just, this guy's unreal. Shout out to Grant for the super chat. Very much appreciated, sir. Big up. Coppen says Don Charles versus Billy Nelson presser would be fire. That actually would be fire. That would be fire. Yeah, other people noticed it in the chat as well. That Dubois was still listening to his dad, even in the AJ fight in the corner. He was still ignoring Don and listening to his dad. The Joker said, Dubois' dad says as long as they keep winning, they'll stay with Don. Such loyalty. And that's cool. I've got no issue with that. I got no issue with them staying with Don. It's a weird setup because Don's there giving him water and telling him instructions, but Daniel's listening to his dad instead. It's weird, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Daniel Dubois, as a fighter, is what he is. He has his limitations. He has his strengths. And I don't really think they can develop him that much more technically. Personally, I don't think so. I think that his biomechanics won't allow for it. But, you know, as it is right now, they're doing a good job. Don Charles, the dad, and obviously Daniel's been boxing from a very young age. What was it, 8 years old? 7 or 8? So he knows how to fight. In 1 second, peeps. All right, somebody in the chat says, Jazzy Jab says, saw Caroline talking, still can't figure the family out. Excuse me, she made some weird analogies about a shopkeeper that just went way over my head. I haven't yet seen it. I want to watch that interview. Just out of curiosity, right? All right, next thing on the agenda here. Bob Arum. Arum says Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder are done. Therefore, they should fight each other. So let's read a quote here from Uncle Bob, the Bob father. He says, no, you don't have an off night getting out of you that way. Weird English there. I just think AJ has been through a lot of wars. I think it's over for him as well as for Wilder. He says maybe they can fight each other. That'd be good. I agree. I've said this in previous streams. If AJ insists on carrying on, I think he should retire. But if he insists on carrying on, then I think fight his contemporaries. Fight people who are in the same boat, who are a little past it, who don't have the punch resistance anymore, who don't have the confidence that they used to have, like Deontay Wilder. Dylan White still seems to have a lot of confidence, but Deontay Wilder, his confidence is shot. He's gun shy. So, yeah, let him and AJ fight each other. That fight was a long time in the making. It'll be like Kell Brook and Amir Khan, right? Even though that fight was past its sell-by date, people still tuned in to watch it. People still bought it. And AJ and Deontay Wilder are still bigger names than Kell Brook and Amir Khan, arguably. So, well, certainly AJ, but Deontay Wilder, is he a bigger name than Amir Khan? I want to say he is. So yeah, I agree with the Bob father. Let AJ go fight Deontay Wilder. Now, there is a conversation out there about whether Anthony Joshua can win a rematch with Daniel Dubois. Well, it's heavyweight boxing. Anything is possible. My whole thing is it worth the risk of AJ getting badly knocked out, potentially suffering serious injuries? Because I'm thinking at this stage, that's getting... I don't want to wish that upon him or any boxer suffering serious injuries, but the way AJ was getting punched up in that fight, you know, and he went out on his shield. That's the next thing. AJ's at a stage in his career where he's willing to get the knockout, or, well, he's willing to actually fight through serious adversity. He did against Andy Ruiz, of course, and Klitschko, but against Andy Ruiz, he looked mentally defeated by the end of the fight. Whereas against Daniel Dubois, he was defiant. And that is very admirable from a perspective of courage and what have you. That's what the fans want to see. They want to see you continuing to try to win and even risking getting knocked out, right? So it's admirable. But for an aging fighter who's just coming off the back of a terrible knockout defeat, you're going to put him straight back in with the guy who iced him like that in a one-sided fight? Can't you see the danger of that? So, yeah, he might have a chance of winning. He did buzz Dubois. He didn't hurt him that bad, but he did buzz him. Dubois has been buzzed several times in his career, and that's what he tends to do when he gets buzzed. He backs off. So, yeah, AJ has a chance, but is the risk worth the reward? That's the question. And I'm not even talking about financial reward, because AJ's got more money than he could possibly ever need. The reward for him is surely more about silencing critics. If you're boxing on past your sell-by date with the main goal of silencing critics, you're not going to win that war. You're not going to win. There are always going to be critics who are deriding you for this, that, or the other. I mentioned in a previous video, to this day, I know people, personally know people, who are adamant that Lennox Lewis was rubbish. They will have a conversation with you today. Yeah, people from back in the 90s. And they'll say Lennox Lewis had a glass jaw. He was rubbish. He never fought the top guys when they were in their primes. He ran from this one and he ran from that one. That's what they'll try to argue. Yeah, I mean, there's a rapper from back in the days. Some of you guys may know him, called R.A. the Rugged Man. He's a white American rapper from New York. I think he's from Long Island, yeah? And he's always trolling Lennox Lewis even now. Whenever he likes to think he's some kind of boxing expert, right? And whenever he talks boxing, he always has to go in on Lennox Lewis. He says that my grandmother's got a better chin than Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis weren't no champion, he was a fake, and yeah. So most boxing fans, of course, look back at Lennox Lewis as one of the great heavyweight champions in history, including myself. But there are still people out there saying he was rubbish. And believe you me, during the 90s, Lewis was criticized more than AJ. That's something that maybe AJ doesn't realize. Yeah? Lewis was criticized more than Anthony Joshua. He had the entirety of the American boxing media against him for the most part. Yeah, obviously not HBO because he was, an HBO fighter, but the press, the boxing press, the writers in the newspapers, they were trashing this guy constantly. And even in the UK, they were having a go at him because a lot of the UK media were Bruno fans. So they were really siding with Bruno and, having a go at Lewis and all that kind of thing. He got it way worse than Anthony Joshua. And that is the trap right there. If you get caught up fighting on past your sell-by date, trying to prove doubters wrong, you can end up in a bad way. Yeah? And that's the danger for Anthony Joshua now. He's clearly not going to get any better. He's going to get worse. He's reached the point of diminishing returns. If you're going to continue, you're better off fighting people who are in the same boat as you, who are just as damaged as you. You're fighting these fresh guys. Is the risk really worth the reward? Anyway, I've given my take on that a million times. Let's move on to something which I'm sure everybody will agree with. And that is DAZN. You guys heard about this? You guys heard about DAZN facing a lawsuit for charging renewal fees without consent? Who knows about this lawsuit? And I want to applaud this lawsuit. I want to applaud it. DAZN have been moving foul over the past year or so. Absolutely foul. Getting desperate, yes, but they are foul. Oh my gosh, they're moving foul. So, yeah, charging renewal fees without consent. Let's have a look at the, this is what is being alleged, right? This is the lawsuit. It says here, streaming service DAZN, home to numerous boxing events and promoters, is facing a proposed class action lawsuit in California. Class action. Okay? Class action lawsuit, not a regular lawsuit. Class action. Meaning this, if the lawsuit is successful, will set a precedent and other broadcasters could get hit, right? Because it's class action. So it says here, they're facing a proposed class action lawsuit in California. The 32-page suit claims the streamer has charged renewal fees without viewers' consent into the charges, according to an article from the from classaction.org. A hat tip to Matthew Brown of Brunch Boxing, whose report brought this story into greater awareness. If the lawsuit allegations are proven, the fees would be in violation of California's automatic renewal law. In the filing, it is alleged that DAZN uses, quote, consumer confusion and inertia as a way of maintaining subscription levels and increasing revenues. The suit adds that, quote, online retailers in the state must highlight extension terms in, quote, a clear and conspicuous manner, as well as obtain permission from the customers before their accounts are charged with subscription renewal fees. It also states that terms surrounding automatic renewals must include an easy option about cancellations. This needs to happen everywhere DAZN operate. This shouldn't just be in California. This should be across the United States. And if they win the class action, I have to imagine it will be. This should be in the UK. Yeah, the way DAZN are moving is foul. It should be easy to cancel your subscription. It's easy to cancel Netflix. DAZN made out as though they were going to be the Netflix of sport. They've turned out to be nothing of the sort. Yeah, Netflix make it easy for you to cancel a subscription. Should be just as easy to cancel DAZN, but it's not. They're moving foul. This needs to be called out. More of the media need to get on this and start questioning, you know, the people who are representatives of DAZN. I don't know if they can get interviews with Blavatnik himself. That Joe Markowski guy, I'm not sure if he still works for DAZN anymore, because I saw that he resigned from his position or was replaced or whatever the case may be. I'm not sure if he has a different position in DAZN, but DAZN has become a bit faceless lately, haven't they? Back in the days when they first launched, there was always someone that the boxing media could interview from DAZN, but now it's like there's nobody. There's just Eddie Hearn, and Eddie Hearn don't work. Well, Eddie Hearn works for DAZN as a promoter for them, but he's not, you know, a DAZN employee directly. And so he's just gonna fob the questions off, and maybe that's how they want it. So this is unacceptable, the way that they're moving. Lots of people have been complaining about it, and I want to see more of the media highlighting this stuff. Yeah, it has to change, it has to stop. It should be easy option for cancellation indeed. Goes on to say, the suit claims that DAZN systematically violates the California automatic renewal law, and that the streamer makes it exceedingly difficult and unnecessarily confusing for those wishing to cancel their subscription. Yep, I've heard this time and time again. The confusion alleges the suit has also resulted in accidental or unintentional sign-ups, courtesy of apparent dark patterns on the site. Oh my gosh. Goes on to say, the case added that the defendant's conduct had, quote, drawn the attention and ire of customers across the country, with countless angry customers taken to the internet to voice their discontent over the defendant's deceitful tactics. Yeah? DAZN, sort it out. You're moving foul. Stop it. Yeah, stop it. This is not the way to treat the customers. Shocking. And yeah, everybody agrees in the chat. We can all agree on this one. We could disagree on many things, but on this, I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. Afro Jam says their Trustpilot reviews are 1.1. Yeah. DAZN are taking the biscuit. Reese Cooper says, does the DAZN channel on Sky still exist? I'm not sure. Boxing Elden Legacy says, I heard Jay Markowski is fighting Garcia in an 8-rounder debut. I don't know though. I think you're talking about a different Markowski. Ayed says the channel was gone. Oh wow. Okay. Guess they didn't want to pay the fees or whatever to keep that channel up there. That's my assumption. All right, let's get to some comments here. About DAZN. So, Andre Rodriguez says, DAZN is the only broadcaster that shows boxing in my country and in many countries, saying that on a different context. I appreciate that. You know, not everybody has many other options, you know? Rayman says, I found it very difficult to cancel, and when I did, they still charged me £13 after I already cancelled. To leave them was like trying to leave an ex. Yep, many other people have said the same thing. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. And their content, their non-pay-per-view content is absolute garbage. I mean, you go on DAZN in most countries. Maybe it's different in certain countries where the content is better. But in most countries, you go on DAZN. The non-pay-per-view boxing content is absolute garbage. It used to be good a couple years ago. They had Canelo fights as part of the subscription fee, so on and so forth. But now it is shockingly bad. They're charging you pay-per-view for every good show. You know, damn near. There was one Saudi show that wasn't pay-per-view, right? That they announced. Which one is it? Which is a Saudi show that's not pay-per-view? Has it already happened or is it coming up? You guys remind me here. My memory's failing me in my old age. Oh yeah, it's Zerda Ramirez, Billum Smith. Thank you, Afro Jam. That's the one, yeah. That's not pay-per-view. And I was about to kick up all types of stink if that was pay-per-view. Trust me. I mean, even their like non-boxing content on there, the NFL and all this type of stuff, you got to pay extra for the NFL stuff. It's like, and have you seen how much they charge? It's unbelievable. Jazzy Jab says, well, there was talk of the Bivol fight only being £15. Is that true? We'll see. We will see. And you know what I don't like as well for UK viewers is if you're outside the UK, if you're in the United States, Latin America, wherever, you get charged $15, right? depending on where you are, if they use dollars or other currency. But let's just say US dollars, you get charged $15. But in the UK, you get charged £15. Well, hang on. The UK pound sterling, is worth more than dollars. So the UK is actually getting charged more money. When it's £15, that's not the same as $15. That's more than $15. Should be like £12 or something. Yeah, if it's $15 US, should be about £12 UK. A shout out to M1 Life for the super chat. Big up, sir. He says, great channel, been listening since 2016. I keep hearing that Usyk versus Dubois was a fight of two halves. I remember Usyk winning nearly every round. PS, I love the 90s. I had hair back then. And me too. Yeah. Usyk, Dubois. Usyk won pretty much every round. Yeah, he did. Maybe they're trying to hype it up in the media, the British media. Maybe it's Frank Warren's lackeys. I don't know. But it wasn't a fight of two halves. Usyk won pretty much every round, but Dubois didn't get beaten up necessarily early in the fight. That's what I will say. Early in the fight, he was getting caught with shots here and there. He wasn't really landing much of his own, but he wasn't getting beaten up at that point. He started getting beaten up late in the fight. After the low blow controversy, Usyk got off the canvas and he beat Dubois up. Pressed the action. Yeah, and this is why people really need to stop underestimating and downplaying cruiserweights in the heavyweight division. Because Usyk did something to Dubois that Anthony Joshua couldn't do. He wasn't pushing Dubois back and bullying him. Usyk was. Even Joe Joyce wasn't. As massive as Joe Joyce is, he beat Dubois, yeah, by sticking a jab on him. But Joe Joyce wasn't pushing Dubois back and bullying him. Alexander Usyk was, the little cruiserweight. And of course, he did the same to Tyson Fury. Let's stop underestimating cruiserweights. If you're good enough, you're big enough. And Alexander Usyk obviously is good enough. Stephen Whitemore says, I think it's fair to say Usyk is something special. He absolutely is. He absolutely is. Yeah, there's a bias against cruiserweights among boxing fans in general. They feel as though heavyweights are supposed to be natural heavyweights for one, and they're supposed to be massive punchers. Because Usyk isn't a massive puncher, he's always had this like stigma attached to him. Oh, he'll never beat the big guys. Oh, this and that. He's not a puncher. You've even heard fighters saying it. David Hay said it. Remember when Usyk first moved up to heavyweight? Hay was like, oh, nah, he can't punch like these big guys. He can't hit hard enough to beat the big guys. That's when Tyson Fury should have known that he was doomed, is when David Hay picked him to beat Usyk. Antonio Tarver, same way. He picked Tyson Fury to beat Usyk. So did Roy Jones, and they all said it's because Usyk doesn't have an explosive punch. Stop underestimating guys just because they can't hit that hard. Usyk hits hard enough. Yeah, he might not be a one-punch knockout man, but he hits hard enough. He's not feather-fisted at all. This ain't a heavyweight Paulie Malignaggi. The man can punch. Yeah, not a crazy puncher, but he's got enough power there to get your respect. Shout out to Bend Over for the super chat. He says, better chin at middleweight. Hagler, Triple G, or McClellan. It's impossible to say, but I would have to say that, here's the reason why I say it's impossible to say, because Triple G's chin was never tested to the same extent as Hagler and McClellan. Yeah? Hagler and McClellan got hit on the chin by two of the hardest punching middleweights in history. Tommy Hearns and Julian Jackson. Yeah. Triple G never got hit by punches of that type of quality. That's not to say he couldn't have taken their power. We don't know. But he never got hit by phenomenal punchers like that in his career. Canelo's a good puncher. Danny Jacobs was a good puncher, but they weren't Tommy Hearns. They weren't Julian Jackson. Do you know what I mean? And Gerald McClellan took the Julian Jackson right hand on multiple occasions in the fight, bang on the chin, and nothing happened. And of course, he moved up to super middleweight and took everything that Nigel Benn had. And he wouldn't go down until he had a blood clot in his brain. And even then, he wasn't knocked to the canvas. He took a knee because he obviously knew something was wrong. McClellan had a cast iron jaw. And actually, that's one of the reasons that he ended up in this bad way that he's in. Because his chin was too good. If he didn't have a chin that good, maybe he would have got knocked out several rounds earlier and he wouldn't have accumulated that much damage. But because his chin was that good, he was able to take just hundreds of clean right hands or whatever it was off Nigel Benn. But yeah, McClellan and Marvin Hagler took stick. Their chins took stick that Golovkin's chin never took. I mean, his chin took a lot of stick, but not from punches like that. So it's hard to say. But shout out to Bendover for the super chat. And in fact, speaking of Julian Jackson, didn't the final knockdown, the knockout, should I say, in the Dubois-Joshua fight, remind you of Julian Jackson knocking out Harold Graham? It was a very similar punch, very similar situation. Jackson was backed into a corner. Harold Graham was coming at him. And then he threw an arcing right hand, which landed bang on Harold Graham's chin, slept him. Very, very similar to the right hand that Dubois landed on AJ's chin. Very, very similar. Thank you, Declan McKenna. I forgot about that. Don Charles called Usyk a cheat. I mean, good God. Is this why I say the guy's a wally? The man is an absolute wally. A cheat? Are you having a laugh? So your guy hits him low. You're allowed up to 5 minutes. He didn't take 5 minutes. He took like 3 minutes. Or 3.5 minutes, whatever it was. And you're calling Usyk a cheat? Honestly, Don Charles is a flipping donut. The man is a donut. He gets all overly emotional, starts saying stupid things. Unbelievable. And Marcel says, surprise Hatman ain't clocked on to Bendover. Come on now. That's an old name. That's an old name. Everyone knows about Bendover. Should I say pause after it? But, I remember back in the days, right? In the 90s, younger people might not know this. But in the 90s, and in the 80s and 90s, censorship in terms of adult content in the UK was very strict. Yeah? Other types of censorship in terms of freedom of speech was not as strict in the 90s. You could say damn near anything and not get cancelled. But in terms of like adult content, censorship was way more strict in the 80s and 90s than it is now. All right? And so when they started introducing adult entertainment on television, on the satellite channels, on Sky and whatever, believe it or not, the adult channels didn't actually show any, it was like softcore and all that. And the teenage boys, I was once a teenage boy, they would tune in for the little free view, the 10-minute free view, where the girls show some skin and stuff like that. But anyway, on one of them old school adult channels in the 90s, there was like some adult star, whatever he was, UK guy called Bendover. So I know all about the name Bendover. Don't watch that. I know about that. I know about that one. But he wasn't no Diddy. He wasn't on no Diddy thing. He was a straight actor, right? He wasn't no Diddy business. Wizard Sleeve says, and Wizard Sleeve's a crazy name as well. That sounds like something off Borat. He's talking about his wife is strong on plow, even though her crumb hangs like Sleeve of wizard. Grant says, I didn't realize that Adam Booth got Don Charles into boxing. Do you have any knowledge on what Don's background was before he became a trainer? Don did box himself. I think he boxed as an amateur, not as a pro. But I remember him saying that he was in a gym somewhere and he was sparring and Bone Crusher Smith was there. And Bone Crusher Smith approached him and said, you look pretty good. Are you interested in turning pro? And at the time, Don Charles was already, I think, in his 30s, maybe mid-30s. And he said, no, I'm too old. So he has a boxing background. I understand he was in security. He was doing nightclub security and all that, which I used to do myself. One sec. All right, we got people name dropping adult actors in the chat here. People talking about Brian Pumper. What else is there? Wesley Pipes. Black Dynamite says, what do you think about Brian Pumper? There's something not right upstairs with him. I don't really watch them people like that. You know, I know who he is, but I haven't really watched interviews or anything with the guy, so I don't really know about. G-Man says, Hatman, you remember a WCW wrestler called Huge Erection? I do not, but I remember that from, well, that's an old joke from back in the days. Beavis and Butthead. I used to love watching Beavis and Butthead, by the way. That cartoon was gangster. I love Beavis and Butthead. And in Austin Powers, they had a bunch of innuendos and stuff like that. It was like a carry-on movie. Carry-on movies were funny. With Sid James and Peggy from... She would later on become Peggy in EastEnders. What was her name? Barbara what? Barbara Windsor. Barbara Windsor, innit? Yeah, she was in the Carry-On movie. Carry-On movies were actually pretty damn funny. And Austin Powers took a lot of inspiration from the Carry-On movies. Grant says Beavis and Butthead or South Park. For me, Beavis and Butthead all day. I was never really that into South Park. It's all right, but yeah, it was not really my kind of thing. I much prefer Beavis and Butthead. Yeah, old British banter, says Jupiter Sterling. That's exactly what Carry On was. Old British banter. It was damn funny. Joe says Dylan White or Herbie Hyde. I'll go Dylan White. Not saying Herbie Hyde doesn't have a chance. He was fast, he could punch. And talk about being overly emotional. Herbie Hyde was a very emotional guy. but I go Dylan White. Hibbert says David Hay or Usyk. I'm going Usyk. Devin Sinclair asking me a joke question. Do you ever think we're going to get a Riyadh season pay-per-view card in Birmingham? Has Birmingham even had a Misfits card? Never mind Riyadh season. Have they had Misfits in Birmingham? Did they have, did Mist, when Mist fought the other day, was that in Birmingham? Birmingham is like the land that time forgot. That was a cartoon back in the days. The dinosaurs, you know, kids' cartoon movie. The land that time forgot. That's what Birmingham is like. Afro Jam says Hyde had a chin. Hyde had no chin, bro. Hyde didn't have a chin. Hyde had no chin at all. That was Hyde's main weakness. He had no chin. He got knocked out in sparring by a jab off Danny Williams. He got knocked out by a Congolese journeyman called Joseph Chingangu. He rematched him later on, but he got knocked out by a journeyman called Joseph Chingangu. He was dropped so many times by Riddick Bowe, by shots that didn't even look that hard. I remember, this is when the boxing journalists in the magazines used to have a lot of banter. And I remember one of them writing about Herbie Hyde in the Riddick Bowe fight, that Hyde hit the deck so many times, and he usually went down on his hands and knees, right? When he was hitting the deck, that he needed to employ a cutsman for his knees. That's how many times he was crawling across the canvas. Hyde had no chin. That was his main weakness. He didn't have no chin. He got knocked out by a jab from Vitaly Klitschko. Go back and watch that fight. If you watch the slow-mo of that fight when Hyde gets knocked out, it looks like a right hand misses him. And the right hand does miss him. But it's the jab that knocks him out. Herbie Hyde is nearly knocked out cold early by a Vitaly Klitschko jab. Man had no chin. He had no chin at all. His chin was worse than Dylan White's chin. He had no chin at all. Peter says, love seeing you hitting the heavy bag on that video clip, Hatman. Shout out to Peter. Charles B says, Brum had Eubank Ben 1. Yeah, back in the days, Birmingham had quite a few things. Gladiators was in Birmingham, and Gladiators was a big show back then. You know, with Nightshade and Rhino and what's the guy called now? The one that went from being big to skinny. He's like a skinny little, what's his guy now? What's the dark skinned guy who is like the toughest gladiator? What was his name? Can't believe I forget his name. The main black guy, the dark skinned black guy. Shadow, thank you. Shadow, yeah? Have you guys seen Shadow lately? Shadow went from being this massive hench, like 18 stone bodybuilder. Now he weighs about 11 stones. Crazy. You literally wouldn't recognize him if you saw him walking down the street now. Man's as thin as a twig. When he got off the roids, literally like they popped a balloon and he just shrunk all the way down. Yeah, he did become a crackhead as well. Yeah, he did, to be fair, Grant, you're right, yeah. He was on the old, he was freebasing. A shadow of his former self. That gets a Sagat laugh. Yeah, the shadow of his former self. Mindsmith says, Hatman, what's your diet like? How much meat do you eat? A lot of meat. I only eat, right now I'm not eating any carbs. I'm pretty much on a, whatever you want to call it, Atkins diet. I don't know. I'm just eating meat. I'm not eating any carbs at the moment. So chicken, fish, mainly chicken and fish at the moment. That's all I eat for the past few weeks. Ben Odom, see, you remember Gary Mason, I swear he was the only guy to beat Shadow on Duel. Swear he was the only guy to beat Shadow. Shadow claims that Gary Mason cheated. To this day, that seems to irk him, you know. But yeah, I remember that one when Gary Mason beat him. R.I.P. Gary Mason. Gary was a funny guy, very bubbly, jovial character. It's unfortunate what happened to Gary. You know, for those of you who don't know, like so many fighters, he ended up with no money. He was working as a security guard and riding a pedal bike when he got knocked off his bike and he died. In Croydon, I think it was. So very unfortunate what happened to him. Jazzy Jab says, Gladiator shows today are rubbish. Is Gladiators still a thing now? They still do that now? Wow. The Joker says, Hatman, look out for that mercury poisoning. I ain't worried about mercury poisoning. I'm a small island boy. Been eating fish from 19 long time. Loads of people in my family going back generations eating fish, seafood. That's been our staple. And I've got people in my family live well over 100 years, so I ain't worried about none of that. The 90s Gamer says, who do you think would win in a fight between AJ and Parker, the rematch? It's a good question. As somebody said in the live stream the other day, that might be the way for AJ to go if he's stuck on this idea of becoming three-time heavyweight champion. Forget about Dubois. Go fight Joseph Parker. Parker is not really a puncher like that. He can hit. And if he catches AJ clean, I'm sure he'll hurt him. But he's not a Daniel Dubois type puncher. He doesn't have a puncher's mentality. And AJ's already beaten him once. So that might be the way to go. And Parker himself is somewhat cautious. So if he can beat Parker, he becomes WBO interim. And then he can force a shot at the winner of Usyk Fury 2. So if he insists on going down that road in terms of chasing that world title, that might be the way to go. Grant says, Hatman, what are your thoughts on sports psychologists? I still don't know of any boxers that employ one, and it seems strange. I know there's a stigma, though. Joshua would benefit massively. Shout out to Ben Dover and Arthur Askey for the super chat. Ben says, Prime Tyson versus any year Usyk, who you got? And Arthur Askey says, favorite boxing film, Hatman, mine, Cinderella Man. I'll come on to the super chats in just a second, but let me just finish my thought here on sports psychologists. Now, here's the thing. Boxing psychology is very different to the psychology of a footballer or the psychology of a track and field athlete or the psychology of a weightlifter. There's some aspects of the psychology which, cross over, which are relevant in both. But boxing puts a certain strain on the psychology of a fighter that it doesn't put on a football player, a weightlifter, etc., etc. Okay? So, the best psychologists in boxing, in my opinion, are not actually trained psychologists. They're coaches. The best coaches are actually better than the best sports psychologist you could get in. I would defy anyone to show me a sports psychologist that was better than Costamato. And Costamato was not a trained psychologist at all. He was a very learned man. He read a lot of books. He read a lot about psychology. You know, he read a lot about philosophy and all these types of things. And he had a lot of experience. Yeah, he had a very interesting life, Costamato. And if you ever heard him talk about the psychology of fighters, he understood it on a deeper level than any sports psychologist I've ever heard talk. So Costamato is kind of a guy who learned about the psychology of fighters from first-hand experience, not from doing university degrees or working with track and field athletes, weightlifters, and football players. Do you know what I mean? Boxing has a very specific psychology. The fighters have to deal with things. I mean, you're not going to race somebody. Somebody's going to try and knock your head clean off. Losing a boxing match is different than losing a race. It's more humiliating if you get knocked out on the canvas. The demons that come with it. Am I chinny? Is it going to happen again? Trying to overcome. Look, see, this is something that track and field and sports and weightlifting, they don't have to deal with any of this stuff. It's unique to combat sports. So, are there sports psychologists who specialize in combat sports and train in combat sports from the beginning? I don't know. So, to answer your question, I don't know how much of a benefit a sports psychologist can be to a fighter in general. You'd have to get the right sports psychologist who gets it, who's worked with boxers for a long time specifically. And I'm talking about for years. Yeah, because it's a very, very different psychology you're dealing with. You know, to go out there and race somebody is not the same type of pressure as to go out there and fight a man who's trying to take your head off your shoulders and knock you out cold in front of thousands of people and millions watching around the world. It's your manhood. Do you know what I mean? A race is not your manhood. But when you're fighting another man, that's your manhood. So it's a different kind of thing. Personally, I don't think anyone can really help AJ. Psychologically. I think he is what it is. I think he is what he is. And the only person who can help him is himself at this stage. You know, if psychologists were the answer to everything, then there wouldn't be any mentally ill people in the world. You know, there are mentally ill people who see psychologists for decades and they remain mentally ill, right? So they can't fix every problem of the mind. They're useful in some instances, of course they are, but there's no, ultimate solution for psychological problems. It's really on a case-by-case basis. Ben Dover's comment was, Prime Tyson versus any year Usyk, who you got? Stylistically, that's a very, very interesting fight. And it's difficult to call because we've never seen Mike Tyson fight a southpaw. He never fought one southpaw his whole career. You don't know how he would deal with a southpaw. The angles are so different. And I've said this over the years many times. Pressure fighters generally tend to have more trouble with southpaws than boxers do. If you're a stand-up boxer and you're good at throwing long-range punches, you will typically handle a southpaw better than a pressure fighter who fights more square on, aggressive, and so on. Southpaws tend to have a field day with those guys. They can shoot the straight left hand right through the middle of the guard. And a lot of pressure fighters like to throw looping shots over the top, as did Mike Tyson. He could throw a good straight right hand with the best of them, but he would often like to loop shots over the top. Southpaws will see that coming a mile off because of the way the angles line up. Their backhand is further away, right? And they're seeing your looping right hand come over the top a mile away, and they're going to counter you all over the place. So it's a very difficult one to call. If it was made in my mind's eye, who would I go for? You know, Tyson was very fast, tremendous hand speed. I might edge towards Mike Tyson, maybe, but not with much confidence. Not with much confidence, because he never fought anybody like Usyk. He never fought anyone as good a boxer. He fought good boxers, great boxers. Vander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis. But in terms of the art of hitting and not being hit, he never fought anyone like Usyk. A southpaw, tremendous fitness, great chin, massive heart, versatile, respectable power, great engine. He never fought anyone like that. With that being said, the people who beat Mike Tyson, most of them beat him from the inside out. They beat the fight out of him. They were willing to stand there and actually bang it out and take the basically heart out of him. Usyk doesn't really tend to do that. Yeah, he will stand up close and, you know, fight with you, but he's never exchanged shots with someone as ferocious as Mike Tyson in his whole career. It's different when you're dealing with a Mike Tyson who was an athletic phenom. I've never seen anything like Mike Tyson in heavyweight boxing. In fact, in the whole of boxing, before or since, in terms of pressure fighting, Mike Tyson was the most dynamic pressure fighter I have ever seen. The speed of his combinations, the counter punching on the front foot, the lead punching, power in both hands, straight shots, uppercuts, hooks, overarm shots, everything. He was just such a dynamic pressure fighter. Usyk has never seen anything like that either. This is why it's very difficult for me to call, because neither man has fought anything like the other. So, you guys love giving me the most difficult questions, the most difficult matchups. I wouldn't even like to call that one. Wouldn't even like to call it. Arthur Askey, shout out for the super chat again. He says, favorite boxing film? I've never really been a massive fan of boxing films, truth be told. And I'm even less of a fan of boxing video games. But I'd probably say Raging Bull. Like Raging Bull with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. A shout out to Henry McGoldrick for the super chat. He says, have you seen what Bivol's ex-wife exposing his injuries and hoping for Arta to knock him out while in front of his kids? Yeah, I've seen the way that Bivol's ex-wife is carrying on. It's desperate, it's foul, and Bivol is well shot of her. That's all I can tell you. The way she's carrying on, I mean, he needs to be kicking himself that he ever shacked up with her in the first place. She's pretty damn awful. Yeah, she's a bunny boiler. That's how she's carrying on, like a bunny boiler. Who knows what film that's a reference of? Who knows what film I'm referencing with that term there, bunny boiler. 90s film. Is it 90s or late 80s? Either late 80s or early 90s. Bunny boiler. There you go, Arthur Askey, Fatal Attraction. That's what it is. A shout out to First to Let, because he's got a Rakim lyric in his name there. First to let a rhyme flow down the Nile. And that's from the song Guess Who's Back, right? Oh no, is it not? Is it Guess Who's Back? No, Been a Long Time. Is it Been a Long Time? It's either Been a Long Time or Guess Who's Back, one of those songs. And they were both on the same album called The 18th Letter. Yeah, The 18th Letter had Been a Long Time and Guess Who's Back on there. It's from one of those songs. First to ever let a rhyme flow down the Nile. Okay, it says it's Been a Long Time. I knew it was one of those. In It's Been a Long Time, the opening line is follow procedures. The crowd couldn't wait to, I'm saying it in a British accent, right? So it doesn't quite rhyme. If I did it in an American accent, it would rhyme better. But follow procedures. The crowd couldn't wait to see this. Nobody's been this long awaited since Jesus. Yeah. Rahim Allah. And I think waffles are great. The answer is yes. I'll get back on those. Our Black Dynamite says, was Rahim a 5%er? Yes, I believe he was. Our Hibbert says, Hackney is kind of gentrified. Yeah. Have you seen Hackney Wick? Have you seen how gentrified Hackney Wick is? Crazy down there. It's like Clapham down there. Not Clapham, excuse me, Camden. It's like Camden down Hackney Wick. That used to be a rundown industrial area. Now, Hackney Wick is full of all the trendies and lovies. I think waffles are great. Says, do they have waffle where you live, Hatman? And do you think they are great? Well, there's a place where I live called Waffle Monkey. And they do pretty good chicken and waffles. Yeah, fried chicken and waffles. Pretty good there. Waffle Monkey. Mindsmith says, what is the best overall city in the UK? It's very subjective. It's a very subjective question. But for me personally, again, it depends what you're looking for. And it depends what kind of person you are. In terms of things to do, obviously London. London's got more things to do than any other city in the UK. But in terms of like value for money, London's like at the bottom. London's horrible when it comes to value for money. When it comes to vibes, you know, the people, London is also at the bottom, in my opinion. London is the home of bad vibes. Yeah, most people in London are pretty damn awful. London is a hustler's city. Everyone's on a hustle. Everyone's trying to be rich. Everyone's trying to act like they're rich. Everyone's trying to act like they're somebody. That's the whole vibe of the place. So yeah, bad vibes. If you're looking for those, you go London. It's not a friendly place. Manchester and Sheffield and Leeds and these places, the people tend to be a bit less pretentious, generally. But yeah, London is like the home of pretentiousness. But if you get the right group of friends and you're making enough money and you're in a nice area in London, you can live a nice life if you like the city, you know? So it all depends on your circumstances, your budget, the kind of people you hang around, the kind of people you are, or the kind of person you are, excuse me. But me personally, I don't like London at all. And I'm a Londoner. I don't like it. There are many cities around the world that I much prefer over London. And again, if you just want to have, live in a city and whatever, and not be paying ridiculous rent, where the vibes are not quite as bad, and you want to live in the UK, go live in Manchester. Manchester has a lot of stuff, a lot of things to do. Not as much as London, but it's still got a lot of stuff and things to do. But it's a lot cheaper. And the people aren't quite as up themselves. And the food is better as well in Manchester. There's somebody putting a sick face on when I mentioned Manchester. Well, again, it's all subjective, but yeah, the food is definitely better in Manchester than it is in London. Way better. Way better. London food is generally pretty damn awful. You really have to search for good food in London. It's not easy. Ocean Blue says Manchester can't be as bad as Birmingham. It's certainly not. Birmingham, like I said earlier on, is the land that time forgot. It's like a time warp in Birmingham, bro. You go there and it's like going back to the 90s, but not the good part of the 90s. You know what I mean? It's like, Birmingham is like decades behind the rest of the country. I don't know what's going on there, but it's been like that for the longest time. Yeah, Birmingham's always been behind for as long as I can remember. It's weird. There are some people mentioning smaller cities. All right, Coventry, Luton, those places are more depressing. Yeah. And because they're small, Luton is small, Coventry is small, they've got an excuse for being rubbish. Birmingham is a big city. It's like 2 million people. What excuse does it have for being so rubbish? How can a city that big have nothing to do? You know what I mean? Coventry, fine, it's a small place. Yeah, Luton is a small place. Birmingham is big. Why have they got nothing going on in Birmingham when it's so big? When I used to go up to Birmingham, I had a girlfriend there. And all of the girls in Birmingham were all over me. They loved London guys and they loved London. They had like an inferiority complex in Birmingham. You know that? Where as a London guy, you could go up there and just clean up with the girls. Yeah, if you could tolerate the accent, which is tough. Which is tough. Yeah, if you get them to keep their mouth closed, and do what you do. But that caused a lot of the Birmingham guys to get jealous of London. In fact, it was weird them times because you would get guys, and this is in the black community, right? You would get Birmingham guys pretending to be from London. They would go to the raves, the dances, whenever they would stay open, because there was so much trouble in Birmingham back then that, the clubs wouldn't stay open long when they were playing hip hop, bashment, whatever. But anyway, there would be Birmingham guys faking a London accent to get girls in the clubs. That's how weird Birmingham was. Yeah. And when the Birmingham guys found out you're from London, now they're kind of looking at you funny and they want to move to you and this and that. Not on a Diddy flex. I'm talking about, to do you harm. A shout out to Ben for the super chat. He says, McClellan versus Roy Jones, who you got? I got Roy. I got Roy winning that fight on points. Yeah, I got Roy. Gotta go with Roy. McClellan's defense, not good enough. Roy too fast in his prime. I mean, if McClellan caught him, he would have knocked him out. But I got to go with Roy. And I know they fought in the amateurs. I think McClellan won in the amateurs. I still got to go with Roy. In fact, I want to mention this here. Eddie Hearn did an interview the other day where he was talking about crime in London and how bad it is. And back in the 90s, people wouldn't have dreamed about walking around with a knife and rare. Let me tell you something. Eddie Hearn is talking absolute BS. London in the 90s. Folks, the stats are out there. Yeah, I can show you them. I can drop the stats in the chat. I was around in the 90s. I can assure you, London in the 90s and the whole of the UK was way more violent than it is today. That's a fact. Never mind what the media is trying to say. Never mind all the political, shenanigans going on. I was around in the 90s and I remember it. It was way more violent than it is today. It's just that they didn't have social media and the internet and all this stuff to record the things that were going on. Yeah? Look up the red rum stats for London in the 90s. They were having double the number of red rums per year that they have now. Last year, I think they had something like 130 red rums in London. 130, might have been less than that, 110 red rums in London last year. And the population in London is like nearly 9 million now. In 1990, look this up, the population was about 6.5 million in London, and they had nearly 200 red rums that year. The highest ever number of recorded red rums in a single year for London, I think it was 2004. They had like 240 or something. So this idea that it's like the violence is worse than ever on the streets of London is absolute rubbish. Absolute nonsense. Whoever's pushing all that, maybe they're trying to sell newspapers or push agendas. It's a load of rubbish. I remember the night, I lived for it. Eddie Hearn was living in a mansion in the 90s. He grew up in a mansion in Essex. He don't know anything about what London was like. He was shielded from all the stuff that was going on. And of course, back then, this is when firearms were a lot more prevalent on the streets in London back in the 90s, in the 80s. Way more prevalent. So maybe there's more shankings today. Because back then, yeah, there was shankings too, but people were firing off shots. Yeah, the gunplay was a lot more in the 90s. In places like Manchester as well, in Nottingham. Way more. There was way more poverty. In the 1980s, you guys need to understand, especially those of you who are younger, in the 1980s, the unemployment was astronomical in the UK. There's been nothing even close to it since. The unemployment in the 1980s was insane. Insane. All over the UK, but certainly in the inner cities. It was crazy. That's why you had all them, football hooligans, the young working class guys, no jobs, no prospects, and they would go into things like football hooliganism, criminality, bank robberies and all this type of stuff. That was the 80s and, most of the 90s. I don't know what kind of picture certain people are trying to paint, but it was not that. Yeah? The working class areas of London were worse in the 90s than they are now. Worse. Believe you me, I was there. Yeah, way worse. Dangerous. Of all ethnicities. Yeah, Brixton was 1,000,000 times worse in the 90s than it is now. Same for Hackney, same for way worse. And even like the working class communities of indigenous Brits like Eltham, where Stephen Lawrence lost his life, that was dangerous down there. You didn't go to Eltham. He wasn't the first guy to get deleted. There was loads of murders down there in Eltham. Red rums. God, this algorithm's gonna get me one of these days. Eltham was, you didn't go down there if you were a certain shade, because people would go missing down there. So yeah, the 90s, I don't know where Eddie Hearn, like I say, he was sheltered and cocooned So he knows nothing about what it was actually like back then. He was living in a mansion. Some of us were actually in the inner city. We can speak from first-hand experience what it was like. And it was far worse than it is today. It's not even close. One of the good things today about London is that it is not as bad as it was back then in terms of crime and violence. Not as bad. Yeah, it gets more hyped up because people have got cameras now and they can film stuff. We didn't have cameras back then. Yeah? if they had cameras back then, the kind of stuff that was going on in the 90s, you wouldn't even believe it. You would not believe it. Because it was next level. And somebody said there, somebody says ghettos in the US have been largely eliminated. They haven't been eliminated. There's still serious ghettos in America, but yeah, even in America, the number of red rums is way lower. Even somewhere like Chicago. Yeah, Chicago gets, over the past few years, got a lot of negative press because of all the violence, which is definitely an issue there. But in the 80s, you go look at the stats, and they've got a lot more of these types of stats for America than they do for the UK. Go look at the stats for Chicago in the 80s. It was like double the number of red rums then than now. It was absolutely insane in the 80s in Chicago and New York. New York in the 80s, mate. That place was literally like, Kabul or something a few years ago. It was crazy in there. New York in the 80s, early 90s was an absolute hellhole in terms of danger. It was nuts them times, nuts. Pretty much everywhere in the Western world today is a lot safer than it was a few decades ago. Pretty much everywhere. Certainly in the Anglosphere, it's a lot safer than it was a few decades ago. The United States is safer, the UK is safer, and so on. Jabby Jabs says, it's not these rough areas, but the nicer areas are more dangerous. Go look at the stats. You can say no, but you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. Go look at the actual stats for the number of overall red rums in London today compared to then. It was double the number then than now. Let me get the stats up for you. Man thinks I'm making this stuff up. I lived it. I was in Brixton. I was in all over London them times. I was up in Manchester, Moss Side, Cheetham Hill. It was for public transport. Mate, if you used to catch the train from Victoria Station, Brixton through South London, everyone used to get robbed on there. That went through nice areas, it went through bad areas. There were gangs of boys who would patrol those trains, and everyone's getting robbed. For your shoes. Talk about public transport's more dangerous. Public transport is much safer now than it was those times. And if you went into Southeast London, down in, Eltham and those places there, I mean, God help you if you had the wrong shade of skin. Yeah, because you're not only getting robbed, you're getting mashed up badly. So you must have fallen for the propaganda. Yeah? Let me show you the stats here. People are living in fantasy land because they're allowing the media and certain people with political agendas to twist their minds up. Oh, no. It's far worse. It was far worse then than it is now. Yeah? Even Britain as a whole, look up the stats for Britain as a whole in terms of red rum. It was way worse decades ago. It's not even close. That's the thing. It's actually not even close. It's not like it was somewhat similar to then. No. It's not close. Let me show you the stats here. I'll get it up for you. I lived it, I remember it, and the stats are right there. Yeah, look here. Here we go. And it's got the sources at the bottom of the page. You want to go click on the sources, click on the sources. I'm going to drop this in the chat. Read it for yourselves. It's right there. And the Met Police, on their website, they used to have a map, and you could click on any borough on the map, and it would tell you exactly, you know, you could select the type of crime, and you could click on any borough, and it would show you how many of that type of crime have been recorded for a calendar year. That has been going down in London for like 20 years. Down, 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 down for 20 years. It's gone up a little bit and down a little bit here and there, but it's never reached the 90s levels ever. Not even close. All the major cities in the UK are much safer today than they were in the 90s. Much, much, much safer. Let me see if I can screenshot this and put it up on the screen. You guys can see it. There's quite a big graphic here, which might not fit across the screen. But it's got several decades worth of red rum stats for London. And it shows you the population, right? And then it shows you the number of red rums. Yeah, I can get this up. Let me just take a screenshot here. But I'll show you what I'm talking about. Because people, honestly, they believe all these silly, like, political agendas, and they, you know, watch the news too much and believe all the rubbish. And they think that, you know, the 80s and 90s in Britain was like Mary Poppins or something. No, it was dangerous. That was during the time of the peak years of football hooliganism. You know what a massive problem football hooliganism was then? It was like they were speaking about it in Parliament all the time because it was such a massive problem. And it wasn't just gangs of hooligans fighting each other. No, them hooligans, if they catch you, wrong shade of skin, or they catch you in the wrong shirt, or even if they just catch you and they don't like the look of you, they're filling you in. This was a regular thing. Definitely in inner city London was a regular thing. Right? That kind of stuff hardly happens anymore. Yeah, I'm not saying it's completely eliminated, but it's not like it was back then. Yeah, them times, people were still robbing banks. Doing post offices and all that kind of stuff. You know, like the old school London families and, you know, old robbers and that. They were still about those times in the 80s and going into the 90s. They were doing all kind of capers. Whereas now they've all, you know, gone legit or gone into different things and so on. And obviously in, you know, the 80s, unemployment was crazy. Far worse than anything there's ever been since. You want me to get the unemployment stats up? The unemployment in the 1980s was insane. When you've got that many unemployed young men, no money. Remember, this is during deindustrialization in Britain, when they're changing Britain from an industrial economy to a service economy, and that transition phase was painful. There was a lot of disaffected young men. That's why you used to have them shows like Boys from the Black Stuff and stuff like that, because it was speaking to the poverty, and the poverty led to the crime and all the other stuff that went on with it. The riots, the poll tax riots and all that stuff. I remember all that. Anyway, let me drop this in the chat here. All right, let me get this up here. So, you see this on screen here? You guys see it? it takes you, this is in London, yeah, the number of red rums in London from 1990 through to 2021. And 2023, there was about 113 red rums in London. And of course, you can see at the bottom, the population growth. So in 1991, the population of London was like 6 point something million. By 2020, it's like 9 million, Greater London. And you can see in 1990, 184 red rums in 1990. By 2021, you got 127. The peak was, where are we at? 2003, where they had 221. 2004, 194. Yeah, 2001, 190. And if you go back through the 80s, similar thing. In the 190s, 180s, roughly double what it is now. So I don't know where people are trying to go with this fantasy that London is more dangerous now than it's ever been. It's rubbish. It's absolute nonsense. People are pushing agendas and all this. It's a lot of rubbish. I was there. I remember it. Yeah. In central London, never mind just the rough areas. In central London, there was stuff happening in the 90s, which doesn't happen today. Yeah. There was stuff kicking off in central London that you will never see happen today. It was a madness. And like I say, people had, they had shooters. They had firearms back then, which made things easier. But at the same time, there was a lot more poverty. You're coming out of the very depressed 1980s. You know, the inner city was a mess, you know. And if you look at stats for Manchester, similar thing. Manchester in the 90s, oh my gosh, what? Even central Manchester stuff was going on. Salford in the 90s. Bro, Salford in the 90s was, I mean, it's nothing like that today. Back then it was crazy. Crazy those times. Yes, very true, Perry. The DRUGS was a lot more serious back then. Yeah, there was crack, which was a huge problem in the 90s. And the brown was a huge problem in the 90s as well. Yeah, definitely. Arthur Askey, yeah. Even Glasgow was far worse those times. The whole of Britain was. Because, and it's a very simple reason. Well, there are multiple reasons, but the main reason is poverty. There was far more poverty in the 80s going into the early 90s than there is today. Far more. Far, far more. Yeah, there's really no poverty, serious poverty in the UK now. But in the 80s, there was real poverty, proper poverty. Our Afro Jam says there are still firearms now. Nothing like the 90s, bruv. Because after the incident in Scotland, I won't name the place, I don't want to trigger the algorithm, but in the late 90s, there was a horrible incident in Scotland. Horrible incident. And they brought in very, very strict laws after that. They had a bunch of amnesties. They locked up loads of people. And it was never the same in terms of gunplay. Yeah. After that incident and the following years where they got all the stuff off the street, right? All the pops off the street. All the steel, all the heaters, all the burners off the street. It's never been like that since. Now it's more, whatever. People getting kitchen shanks out and whatever. But them times, yeah, you still had the old school Cockney, you still had the old school Cockney villains running around with the shotties and all that stuff. Yeah, licking off banks and post offices and all that. They were doing that back then. And you can see as well that it wasn't just more red rums, but the rate was higher because the population was smaller. Yeah? In the early 90s, the population of London was under 7 million. Now it's like nearly 2 million more. So the actual rate was higher. Now the rate might be 1.2 red rums. Back then it was closer to 3. So the actual red rum rate in London was over double what it is today. Oh yeah, never mind all the propaganda and all that stuff in the media. So it's a lot of nonsense. I was there, I remember it. Yeah, and I can tell you these stats are legit. It weren't nothing like, they're trying to tell you it is. Eddie Hearn grew up in a damn mansion. What does he know about what London was like in the 90s? he was secluded off in Essex, going to private school and all this. And he thinks he knows what London was like in the 90s. Like, give it a rest. Give it a rest. London was in a transition phase in the 90s because the gentrification started then, but the violence was worse still. The 80s is when London was at its most impoverished in my lifetime anyway. Yeah, like the areas in the 80s looked so run down. Even Soho those times in the 80s looked, it was so, grimy and yeah. King's Cross, who remembers King's Cross back in the 80s? King's Cross, and it has a red light district back then. King's Cross was grimy in the 80s. Jazzy Jabs is talking about ABH, GBH. I'm talking about actual serious stuff like red rums. Yeah, people can just report more stuff. And then, oh wow, we've got a rise in ABH. People are more willing to report stuff back today than they were back then. Yeah, back then, every working class community is like, no one's a grass. It's not like that today. Yeah, but when you're talking about serious crime and red rums, it's not close. London had double the number of red rums in the 80s and 90s than it has now, even though the population was smaller. I don't know where you're going with that, bro. You believe in all the hype and all the propaganda is not true. It's a much safer place now. And but here's the thing, right? Despite London being safer today, maybe it's just my generation, the generation I grew up in, so I could relate to certain things and whatever. Jabby Jabs, no, you're completely wrong. Completely wrong. When I was growing up, yeah, fighting was something that everybody did in every community. In the working class white communities, people were fighting on the streets all the time. Football hooliganism all the time. The difference is people generally were not snitching as much. They weren't going to the police to report an ABH or a GBH the way they do today. That's how it was back then. Everyone had a straight... I remember when I was on Facebook years ago, and I was talking about the number of street fights I had growing up, and I was amazed when there was other people in the group telling me that they'd never actually had street fights. And they were looking at me like I was trying to come across as some kind of tough guy. And I'm like, no. In my generation, when we grew up in working class communities in London, everyone was having street fights. It was a normal thing. It wasn't something like, just certain sections of the community. No. Everyone was doing that stuff. Yeah, everyone was having... Peter Fury even talked about it, you know, when he was growing up in, I guess, the 70s or whatever, going from school to school, you know, as they were travelers. And he talked about being picked on because he was a traveler. And he said everybody could fight back then. It's not like today. Everyone was fighting. Yeah? I'm not nitpicking, you're nitpicking, Jazzy Jabs. I've proved to you that there's double the number of M's of red rums in London today. And in the whole of the UK, by the way, same thing, which shows you how serious it was. And by the way, for those, because I know what you're trying to get at, you're believing all the, you know, ethnic propaganda that they're pushing. What was the ethnic makeup of London in 1990? Do you know? I know. Do you know? The ethnic makeup of London in 1990 was 85% white British. How about that? 85%. And in that year, they had double the number of M's that they had last year. That doesn't jive with the with the narrative that some people want to push. Yeah? It's a poverty thing. There was a lot more poverty then. There was a lot more shooters on the street. Yeah? And that's what drove that type of violence. 85% white British London in 1990, and it had double the number of red rums that it had last year, with a smaller population as well. So don't believe, you're falling for the propaganda, all right? Falling for the propaganda. Totally falling for it. How do you account for 85% white British in 1990, but the red rum rate was over double what it is now? How do you account for that? How do you account for that? Indeed, he didn't even spell propaganda right, but well, he's falling for the propaganda. He doesn't understand that it was a generation where people would have fights and they wouldn't go to the police. Simple. Because that's what you're trying to get at. I know what you're doing. I know what you're trying to get at. I just propagandaed off, that's all. Far less surveillance as well, that's a good point. In the 90s, there was far less surveillance, far less cameras, and in the 80s, everything wasn't filmed. It was easier to get away with stuff then. That's a very good point, I forgot about that. I remember when a lot of the cameras came in. Yeah? A lot of people were getting away with stuff because there was no cameras anywhere. Yeah, people getting glassed and bottled, yeah, regular back then. No smartphones, easier to get away with stuff. But despite all the madness back then, there were things about society that were better, for sure. It was more dangerous, but there were many things about society I prefer back then. As I said in the last stream, yes, the sense of community is not there anymore. Society is atomized now. Everybody's out for themselves. Everyone's selfish. Everyone thinks they're a superstar now. Yeah, that I definitely don't like about today, is the selfishness of people today. Back then, you know, before social media, I mean, the dating game, right, was a lot better back then. Shout out to everybody who remembers the dating game prior to social media. Man, the dating game was so much better before social media. A shout out to Arthur Askey. Big up. He says, I grew up in a council estate in the northeast of England in the 80s. It was 99% Anglos and you were always getting in dust-ups. It was a very violent time. Thank you. That's how it was. That's how it was. Back then, everyone had to get stuck in. If you grew up in a working class community back then in the UK, it was rough, just generally. People were more hard, more rough. You know, it was what it was. I remember the time when people started having these, like, when men started having like fancy, you know, designer haircuts and stuff like that. I remember when that time came in. I remember the crossover from like the old school where men were like, you know, bare bones. They didn't wear anything that looked too, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? They didn't wear anything that looked too fancy. That's the best word I could think of. Yeah, I remember the transition from that, the old school bare bones, flamboyant, that's exactly the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Henry King. From the old school, like bare bones type British guy. And then it started crossing over to this like flamboyant look where people were doing all kind of funny hairstyles. And I remember that crossover because back then in the 70s and the 80s, you know, Britain was all industrial. These guys were coming out of, you know, the coal mines and steel factories. And a lot of them have been in the, you know, World War II and all that type of stuff and different conflicts. It was just a harder, tougher generation. Yeah. And back then, you know, everybody was giving their kids the backhand at home. That was standard. Yeah. That was a standard thing. It was hardcore those times. You know, up in the Northeast, it was hardcore. And some parts of that are good, some parts of that are bad, you know? But people used to get the belt, the back of the hand and all that. And the police didn't get involved. Nah, it's a domestic dispute. Yeah. Afro Jam says, more interested clothes than their gal. Yeah. But yeah, dating was so much better before social media. You guys who've grown up in the social media generation, you will never understand how much better dating was before social media. You will never understand. I'm glad I grew up in a generation before social media. Seriously, I'm glad I had my, you know, teens and most of my 20s before social media, because it was so much better dating. You know, that was during a time when the best looking girls were, they'd never get approached anywhere else other than real life. There was nowhere else for them to get approached, right? So they weren't getting approached as much as today, because now they've got dating apps, they've got Instagram, and their heads get so inflated. They're getting flown out to Dubai by randoms and all that kind of stuff. So their egos are crazy. But you could approach a nice looking girl in the 90s and you'd be amazed that, you know, some of them had attitudes, of course, but it's not like today. Yeah. So many girls back then would feel like grateful and happy and excited to be approached by a decent looking guy. It was just a totally different world. Totally different. Jackie Boy Johnson, indeed, you can get rich in your bedroom now. OnlyFans. You know how many of these girls are actually making, you know, 200, 300, 400 bags a year, sometimes more than that, on OnlyFans. Back in the days, we used to call that peep show. Yeah? In Soho, the perverts used to go down there and pay whatever money to go watch a peep show. Now the peep show is OnlyFans. And whereas the peep show girls back then, they weren't making no money. They were like, a lot of them were brasses, yeah? Today, the OnlyFans girls are making crazy money. What? They're making more money than architects, some of these girls. And pilots. It's crazy. It is actually unbelievable. And that has destroyed the dating game. I mean, good God. All that stuff, oh no. Jojo, I agree with you. I blame the men too, they're paying for it. Yeah, simps are a massive problem in modern society. Simping is crazy. Simping is crazy. I'm telling you, some of these girls are making more than architects. It's incredible. Getting naked on the internet is paying them more money than people that are actually useful to society. You know? Incredible. A shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, comfort has been the downfall of the UK. People don't care about anything so long as everything looks fine from the end of their driveway. Shout out to Matt. But yeah, like I say, not to rub it in, but I'm glad that I grew up in a time before social media. It was so much better socially. That's the weird thing about social media, is that it's actually anti-social. It's the opposite of what it sounds like. As Stephen Whitemore says, architects don't actually make that much. I know a few of them. Depends what you mean by that much, but like I say, there are OnlyFans girls making more money than people that do useful jobs. You know? Architects, industrial engineers, so on and so forth. Taku says 80s must have had simps. Yeah, there's always been simps, but they weren't as bold as they are today. We had the simps under manners and under pressure back in the days. Just being real. We had simps under manners and under pressure, so they didn't show their simpish ways as brazenly as they do today. They were secretive about their simping. Yeah? Because they knew if the guys found out about it, they'd catch hell over it. So simps were moving in the shadows back then. They were moving in the shadows. Now they are. They're loud and proud now. That's what it is. Yep, they're loud and proud. And the simps are loud and proud today. Big simping. Simp City. That's what we're living in today, is Simp City. That's what the society has become. Simp City. Ayed says, Hatman, what's your opinion on pursuing another man's girlfriend if you have no friendship with the guy? Personally, I don't like doing that. I don't like getting up, in a mix-up. All that weird stuff. If other guys want to do it, that's them. But yeah, if a girl's dealing with another guy, I don't like to get involved in situations like that. That's not for me. Obviously, I might have been involved with girls who didn't tell me that they had someone else, but, in terms of if I knew, I wouldn't do it. The Simpsons, yeah. Shadow simping. Yeah, that's another thing Afro Jam. I've never been somebody to fight over a female. Like, hell no. I'm not gonna fight nobody over a female. You know how many guys have gone prison, lost their lives over a female, and what happens? The female is out with a next guy while the two previous guys she was dealing with, one of them's dead, and one of them's in prison. Who's the sucker? The two guys. They're the fools. How are you gonna go prison for a female? That's crazy. Yeah, so many guys go, get caught up in all that nonsense. Yeah, I'm not fighting over no woman, man. That's ridiculous. Taku says simping is being promoted and encouraged. Indeed it is. Indeed it is. It's being promoted and encouraged. And if you are like an old school man, a masculine man, now you're toxic, innit? You're an evil to society. Leo O'Brien says, Hatman, what are you doing if your lady slaps you in public? I wouldn't answer that publicly. But that has never happened to me. And, choose your females wisely because you don't want to end up with a woman who puts you in that position. Yeah, that's what I'll always tell guys. Don't go for these fiery females, man, who are going to do stupid stuff and force your hand. Yeah? It's not a good look. You notice a girl's got any kind of temper or messed up attitude, that's a no-go. You're supposed to have forward thinking. Yeah? Forward thinking. Jackie Boy Johnson says, have you seen De La Hoya's wife? I may have done. I can't recall off the top of my head what she looks like. Checkmate says, might sound controversial, but I think getting married is simp behavior right now too. No real benefit for the man at all. The ring is the woman's insurance policy. I understand what you're saying. And in many cases, you'll probably be right. But there are still, for example, religious communities. And I'm talking about in the West. Outside of the West, different story. Yeah? In Latin America, where I am, it's okay. In many other parts of the world, it's okay. But in the West, yeah, getting married is not quite what it used to be. But there are still some religious communities where they have traditional women. And in that scenario, I wouldn't say that getting married is simping. But if you're talking about people under the age of 28, living in cities, getting married at that point is like, it's a minefield. For sure. Indeed, Dr. Wu, marriage within a religious context works because the roles are clearly defined, and if both the man and the woman believe in that, then it can work. But in the secular world, it's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult. Grant says, marriage doesn't mean much to a man, but having another man live with your kids is crazy. Kids are a much bigger commitment than marriage. Indeed. Somebody making a comment there about people in certain countries marrying their first cousins. The royal family marry their cousins too, right? Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were cousins. Alabama, it's the norm. Well, in many traditional cultures around the world, it's the norm. Throughout Asia, marrying cousins is very common. And even in certain parts of the Americas, in Latin America and so on, in quote unquote Christian countries, especially on small islands, it happens. It happens. Yeah, Alabama down south, yeah, you know. Jojo says, do you think people will look back on AJ's career fondly 10 years from now? I think they'll look back on his career 10 years from now more fondly than they do today. That's what I'll say. Whether they look back on it fondly, you know, I mean, it's subjective, right? But I think they'll look back on it more fondly. I think time tends to be kinder to most fighters. So I think they'll look back on it more fondly than they do now. Yeah, Jackie Boy Johnson says, fighters tend to get more respect once they retire. Indeed, they do. They do. They tend to get more respect when they retire. All right, we got a delusional Tyson Fury fanboy in the house. Here's his question. He says, Hatman, why didn't you cover Joshua losing as much as you did Fury getting robbed? Fury getting robbed? Nah, that gets a Sagat. That gets a Sagat. That gets a Sagat laugh. Fury getting robbed? Are you having a laugh? I said Fury got robbed. Unbelievable. I hope you're trolling. Good God, man. Get a grip. Fury got robbed. Let me tell you who got robbed. John McDermott got robbed. How about that? John McDermott got robbed in the first fight with Tyson Fury. We'll talk about robberies. And Fury got robbed. And yes, I made far more videos about Usyk Fury than Dubois Joshua. Why? It's a more important fight. More important fight. Dubois Joshua was an interesting fight. you know, going in, but it never had the significance of Usyk Fury, to me anyway. And truth be told, the algorithm around Usyk Fury was crazy. Yeah, I could put out an Usyk Fury video and the views would go nuts on the video. With Dubois Joshua, the algorithm isn't really favoring, you know, Joshua Dubois videos the way it did Usyk Fury. So at some point you're like, you know what? I've reached the point of diminishing returns making Joshua Dubois videos. So let me try to do something different. But with Usyk Fury, it was from a YouTuber perspective, yeah, as a creator, it was the gift that kept on giving. You know, you made Usyk Fury videos and, I mean, the views were incredible and therefore the revenue is incredible. And there's definitely been a dip in interest in boxing content on YouTube since the Undisputed fight. Yeah, a lot of energy has gone out of boxing since that fight because everything was building up to that fight, right? Everybody wanted to see the Undisputed. Everyone wanted to know once and for all who is the best heavyweight in the world. That fight was a 2-year build-up. 2 years, okay? Think of all the energy that built up for 2 years into that fight. And so once it happened, there was always gonna be a come down, you know? There's always gonna be a come down after such a high. And it turned out to be a great fight, right? Dramatic fight. And there was always gonna be a come down. Yep, same for G-Man. Growth has not been the same since May. Yeah. That was the crescendo. Sosa says Hatman Beterbiev knocks out Bivol. We shall see. I look forward to the fight. It's going to be very interesting. Jose says Hatman doing what works for the channel. Indeed. Got to. All right, peeps, I'm going to turn this one in. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining me once again on this live stream. I appreciate you all. If you haven't done so already, please stick a like on the video. Helps it get seen. Be good. Take it easy. And I'll catch you in the next one. I'm out, peeps.